Okay, don't end up like this. And we're going to try and make it so that you do not end up like this by the end of the morning. If you've ended up like this and you have no clue what I'm talking about, you'll see, because Peter in 1 Peter 3, he's going to talk to husbands and wives. So yeah, we need to start a little light, but we're going to take a look here. Okay, we're going to start off by laying a couple of stories down for you, and instead of reading them for you, I'm just going to tell you about them. You can read them yourselves later. They are less than maybe like half a chapter apiece. But here's the context. We're in the desert with Abraham and Sarah. This is in Genesis 12, and in Genesis 12, it's very early in the story of Abraham. He's come from like present-day Iraq, Persian Gulf. He goes up toward Turkey with his family and his dad. They turn up there and they go down the Palestinian coast. They end up in Canaan, and that's where God tells them, you're going to have a lot of people related to you. You're going to live here. So this is his first steps into this promised land. Very early. Abraham is 75, I believe, and so they're there. And while they're in Canaan and they're kind of checking out the digs, because they're going to relocate there. They're relocating there. There's a famine in that area, so they decide to go south. And in all the time, it turns out in the Old Testament, if there's a famine, you always go to Egypt, because Egypt always has food, because they've got the Nile River and stuff like that. So Abraham and Sarah, while they're on this kind of look-see tour, first time in Canaan, they go down to Egypt. And when they go down to Egypt, Abraham makes a deal with Sarah, and he says, look, if we go someplace where they're not God-fearing people, and they see how beautiful you are. At 75, it's possible, ladies. And you see how beautiful you are. You need to tell those people that you're actually my sister, and that way they won't kill me. Because see, the protocol was, if someone wanted to take a woman to be a wife, and this is normally people in great power, if they took a woman, well, if she was already married, then they would still take her, but it was against their ethics to take a married woman. So you had to make sure she was not married when you took her, so you killed the husband. And that was the ethical way to take a woman. That's just the way it was. So Abraham knew this. He came from a horrible area, so he knew this was the case. So he said, look, if this threat comes to me, just tell them you're my sister, and then they won't kill me. So sure enough, when they get down to Egypt, and some of Pharaoh's guards guys who are out on the edges of the area, they see Sarah, and they go, oh, hubba, we need to tell Pharaoh. They tell Pharaoh. Pharaoh goes, hubba, oh, let's take her then. So they go out there to take her, and they get ready to take her, and she's in this entourage with Abraham, and she and he both say, well, we're kind of siblings. They go, great, that works everything out just fine. We're taking her. They take her back to Pharaoh. Abraham's left out there on the camels. Tick, 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 tick. And then suddenly God intervenes, and Pharaoh finds out that he's probably in deep doo-doo with the gods of the universe, because he just took a woman who's married. So he freaks out. He brings her back to Abraham, and Pharaoh says, what do you think you're doing? You are endangering my life and the life of the entire kingdom of Egypt by telling me that you are siblings. Take her back. Nothing happened between us. What are you doing to us? And so he actually berates Abraham for lying to him about Sarah being his sibling. Now you fast forward to Genesis 20. In Genesis 20, now we are well down. We're like maybe 20 to 25 years later. A lot of water's gone under the bridge by this time. You've had Sodom and Gomorrah has happened. You've had the wars in the area where you see this kind of cameo appearance of this weird priest dude named Melchizedek. I mean, a lot of stories gone down in the life of Abraham and Sarah. Isaac hasn't quite been born yet. He'll come in the next chapter. But it's about 25 years later. Things are not going totally well in terms of food production in this new promised land. So they start wandering south toward Egypt, but they just get into the Negev desert. If you know Israel, the first desert you get in when you go south from Israel is the Negev, and you get through that, and then you get to Egypt. So they're in the Negev desert, and there's a guy who's the king in Gerar. He's the king of these people who live out in that area. His name is Abimelech, or if you want to say it more properly, it's Abimelech. But Abimelech is out there, and same thing happens. They spot Sarah, who now is like 20 to 25 years older, and they go, oh, hubba, 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 hubba. Let's go out and take her because she looks like, she'd be great stuff. So they take her. Carbon copy case again. They take her. This is 25 years later. They take her to be another wife of Abimelech. She goes there. Tick, 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 tick. God prevents Abimelech from sleeping with her. Tick, 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 which is interesting. And then God comes to Abimelech the king. By the way, Melech means king. So this is Abimelech the king. Comes to Abimelech in a dream and says, you've just taken a married woman. You're going to die. Go read it. It's a great, this dream account is great in Genesis 20. You are going to die. Can you imagine having a dream at night and God saying, you're going to die unless you give her back? He's totally freaked out by this. And so he immediately takes a whole bunch of his guys along with a whole bunch of wealth and goes and confronts Abraham and says basically the same thing that Pharaoh said to him 25 years earlier. What do you think you're doing? You're going to get me killed from the God of the universe. You're going to get me and all in my own entire kingdom. What do you think you're doing? Now, there might have actually been a hint in his voice about the fact that Sodom and Gomorrah had just happened. Because Sodom and Gomorrah is adjacent to the Negev desert where this guy lives and where he controls stuff. He probably saw at a distance God's disfavor with Sodom and Gomorrah just recently and comes to understand something about these new people that Abraham's leading in this promised land. And he's thinking, man, God came to me in a dream, and if I don't do the right thing now, I'm going to get Sodom and Gomorrah. So he's terrified. Read it in Genesis 20. He's terrified. And he comes to Abraham. He rips on everybody and he says, look, why are you doing this? Why did you lie? And interestingly enough, this time, Abraham comes up with an excuse. It's hilarious. So Abimelech comes to him and says, what do you think you're doing, passing off this woman as your sister when she's your wife? And Abraham says, well, actually, she is my sister. She's my half-sister. It turns out we have the same father, but not the same mother. And at that point, you expect Abimelech to say, oh, well, in that case. No, he doesn't do that. No. Like Abraham's thinking he's getting out of this somehow by saying, well, technically it's true. We're siblings, technically. So don't get all over my case. No, it's hilarious. I don't even know why he brings it up. It's just the stupidest thing. It's true, actually. It's actually true. And that was also his rationale to tell Sarah, when this stuff goes down, tell him you're my sister, because, hey, you are. So we're not really, lying. You are. This is a lie of omission because you're not telling me you're actually married. That would change the entire equation. So anyway, Abimelech puts her back in Abraham's keeping, and he also pays a silver sum, which is a way of saying that there's nothing dishonorable about this woman now. Just because I took her to be my wife, I didn't sleep with her. And actually, Abimelech, when he's having this discussion with God in the dream, he says, I haven't slept with her. And God said, that's right, because I prevented you from doing that. I prevented you from sinning. Now, what you need to do is bring her back. Take this silver so everyone will know that she's not been dishonored in any way at all. There's nothing wrong. This is okay. And on top of that, you ask Abraham to pray for you because of what you did wrong. You got to read this. You just can't make this kind of stuff up. So, in fact, he does. So he asks Abraham to pray for him. And then what happens is the fact that it turns out that everyone in Abimelech's, local group of wives and family were infertile. They couldn't have babies because of what Abimelech had done. And now they could. It was restored. So anyway, it's a fascinating story. You need to read it for yourself. I don't do half the justice to it. But what you need to keep in mind in these two incidents is that they're separated by 25 years. Abraham did the same shtick each time. And Sarah's response, which is important to us, she did the same thing each time. What did she do? She let it happen. But Yeah, I know. Okay, so hold on to that thought. We need those two thoughts so we can understand Peter. So previously in 1 Peter, we were talking about your conduct as aliens, especially in a public or now moving into a private sense. Your conduct is a great testimony about the nature of who God is, most especially if you're in relationships, man-made institutions where you're being done dirt to. That is, you're in this institutional relationship, you're there like slaves and masters or emperors, all that kind of, you're there. And even though it may be unjust and it may be heavy-handed and it might just actually be just flat out wrong, your reaction staying in that relationship glorifies God when they are wrong. Okay, so that's where he's gotten to. So he's going to extend that idea today. Because remember, he says in 2:13, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. So today, chapter 3, likewise, wives, be subject to your husbands. Well, not multiple husbands, but you know what I mean. Wife, husband. Okay, all you wives, be subject to your husbands. In the same way that a slave needs to be subject to an unjust slave master, in the same way that we as citizens need to be subject to unjust rulers, you're in this relationship, you need to be subject. Now, just to give you a little preview, I talk about these verses when I do premarital counseling. I might have done it with some of you, I can't remember. But this one I always come to because this is a pretty powerful thing right here. And right at this point, when I have a couple in my office, predictably, you see the wife kind of shift in her seat a little bit. And I get that. I get that. So, and Peter is not just going to talk about wives being subject to their husbands. He's going to talk about being subject to bad husbands. Yeah, okay, let's work on this a little bit. This is primarily an issue of the will. And that's what I want to point out here, because this will come back over and over again. Being subject to your husbands is really an issue of the will. So in a marriage, you have a husband and a wife. Each one has an independent will. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if you want to make the marriage work, you got to figure out whose will is going to prevail in certain situations. Like, for instance, if you're talking about, we're going to have a summer vacation with the kids, should we go to Disneyland? Should we go should we go camping? What are we supposed to do? And the husband and the wife almost always have two different ideas. Almost always. And so how are you going to work out how these two wills come into one will? And so that's the fascinating dynamic of marriage, is that as a unit, you can only do one thing, but you have two independent ideas. So what Peter is saying here is that in the end of that discussion, you need to sort of let the husband have sway. Someone's got to be in charge. Someone's got to be, in a sense, the resident tiebreaker in the discussion, or make it even more important than that. For instance, before we moved down here 15, 16 years ago, we were up in Spokane. A lot of chaos swirling around us, a lot of uncertainty about the future, didn't know what was going to go on. We had pretty much decided and put our foot down that we were going to live in Spokane for the rest of our lives. So this was just not going well with our intentions. And so the long story short is that God had impressed on me and then eventually Dorothy that we needed to come here. Well, I remember at the time we had these discussions and back and forth and pros and cons. You go through all this kind of stuff that you do as two wills trying to come up with one action, right? And we had these discussions, and then finally I said, well, I think we need to go. I think we need to go to Utah. And I remember Dorothy said something to the equivalent of, I'm glad you have to make that decision and not me. So when it comes down, you see what I'm saying? When it comes down to coming up with one action based on two wills, sometimes it's a great luxury for one person to take the responsibility and go, well, here we go. And we'll thrust forward. So we could talk about dozens of different kinds of decisions, but what Peter's saying right here is, ladies, be subject to his will. So if you have this contending will, even though you're talking a lot, when it gets to the end, just say, well, honey, I'll just go with what you say. There's some wisdom in this, and we'll see how this works in a second. So it's an issue of the will. It's an issue of saying, not my will be done, but yours be done. Now, this is not a recipe for being a doormat for your husband. And we'll see that in a second as well. But we're just saying when it comes down to coming up with one joint decision based on two independent wills, be subject to your husband. Okay. And if that makes you uncomfortable, we'll look at it, don't worry. So that even if some do not obey the word, that is, ladies, if your husband is someone who doesn't obey the word, okay? In fact, this does not obey the word. I don't think that's a great translation. When you look what's there in the Greek, it's this idea, men who don't allow themselves to be persuaded. They are unpersuadable. Is literally what it means. So it's not someone who doesn't obey the word necessarily like they know it. They're not persuaded. They're stiff-necked, hard-hearted. They are not going to go anywhere close to biblical ethics or morality. They are unpersuadable. So ladies, how do you live in a relationship where your husband is unpersuadable in terms of biblical issues? What do you do if he's unpersuadable? And now when I get in discussions on the internet,
my Bible says believe the word, which means...
Or believe the word, yeah. So it's, in fact, it comes down this idea, believe always comes from this idea of being persuaded.
Right.
Belief and faith is I've taken in the information, I am persuaded that this is true, I embrace that. This is a more contentious usage of it, though. It's more like, here's someone who has probably bounced up against the word before, and they've said, I'm unpersuadable. There's nothing you can say that can change my mind. I'm stiff-necked. So it's really a very verbally resistant kind of idea. So you do have a chance here to sway him, ladies. But there's a good way and a bad way to do this. So that they may be won without a word. What? Yeah, they may be won without a word. And back in the East Coast, we had this Yiddish word we called nudge. It's not used out here, so every time when I use the word nudge, people go, nudge? What's nudge? Nudge? It's Yiddish. I grew up in a Jewish community, so that's why it is. A nudge is basically a nag. It's someone who's constantly, and they're trying to persuade someone by being incessant in this. That's a nudge. So in my neighborhood, I actually saw a very beloved Jewish couple that I know on that street. I, to this day, love them to death. They both passed away, but I remember him saying, honey, don't nudge me. Don't nudge it. So it's a verb as well as a noun. So there you go. So it's a nag is all it is. So don't be a nudge. Don't be a nudge. So he's saying, if you need to persuade your husband because he's an idiot on biblical things, you got to do it without using words. Well, wait a second. Because if you're a woman, you understand, and men understand this as well. If you're a woman, you are more skilled at words than men are. And I'll say that as a general sense. There are some men as an exception who are not bad with words, but in general, women have the verbal advantage over men. Because men's conversations usually sound like this. Huh? Oh. That's deep manly conversation. So when he's saying, look, you've got someone who is unpersuadable, know what that word means? It means that your words aren't going to go anywhere. So if they're already unpersuadable, what do you think is going to happen if you use words trying to persuade them? And if you're a nudge-like incessant about it, what do you think the reaction is going to be when you use words like a machine gun and never stop? You know where this is going to go. I mean, we see this happen in relationships. So Peter's saying, let's be pragmatic here. If you want to see your man change, you got to stop using words. Really? Yes. Because he's unpersuadable. Well, then how does it work? Here's how it works. By the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Nah, that doesn't work, does it? Nah, I don't think so. No. Yes, it works. It actually does. I can testify that it works. And a lot of men who have lived with wise women can testify that this works. And I'll give you some anecdotes in a few minutes. But this is really what Peter's saying. If you have a husband who's in the wrong, who has set his heart to be unpersuadable, then look, words are going to bounce off like he's got a bulletproof vest on. It's just not going to go anywhere. And in fact, you'll make it even worse because the more you do it, the more resistant he'll become and the more unpersuadable he'll become. Now, guys, ladies, you're not listening to this. Guys, am I right or am I right? Isn't it true that when you get into a position where your wife is in the opposite position, that the more they use words at you, the more entrenched you get? Guys? Any guys? Yeah, okay. This is really true. Just speaking from a male design perspective, this is very wise. because it doesn't work. There's something that persuades a man's heart when he's wrong. Something that persuades his heart that comes from the perceived conduct and the willingness of those around him to go with his stupid plan that in the end changes him. And this word right here is gigantic. See your respectful and pure conduct. Now look, this is really hard to do. I mean, we're saying this in a simple way, but ladies, this is tough to do, especially when your husband is wrong. When your husband is wrong and you know he's wrong and he's being insensitive, and there's like 1,000 ways you can tell your friends he's wrong. But what you need to do is respect him nevertheless. Well, how in the world do you do that? I mean, he's wrong. Well, okay, you don't have to respect his decision necessarily. I mean, you're not endorsing it. You don't have to endorse any of that stuff. But what you do have to do is you have to respect the relationship you're in, and with him as being the husband. Remember, that's what we did when we talked about respecting the emperor. You don't have to enjoy who Nero is, but you know what? You need to respect the office. Same true with slaves and masters. Remember that? You don't have to like your bad master, but you do have to respect the office. And here we are again in one of these relationships, and you have to respect the office, even though he's wrong. Now, I'm going to come back to this respect word, this big R word, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. But so the respect is probably, and I'm going to say this again later on for ladies, respect of a husband is probably the most influential way to change him. And disrespect is the fastest way to ruin. And especially when he's wrong. We'll get back to that, okay? It's just the way we're designed. Okay, so number 3, he says, and this is an interesting segue, but he explains himself in a second. Don't let your adorning be external. You know, the braiding of the hair, the putting on gold jewelry, the clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So what's he getting to here? Why did he suddenly segue to fashion statements? Well, it's because he's saying how you respond in this situation with an errant husband actually is as beautiful as gold and braided hair and fine clothing. It's beautiful. Now, this is not just with God, because he's going to also emphasize this in a second, but it's the fact that, listen, you already know this. Men and women, men are highly attracted to the beauty of their wives. Captain Obvious here. The beauty is something that men are built in to appreciate, and women are built to really enhance. And there's nothing wrong with that. God made us this way. There would be no babies on the earth if this didn't happen. So beauty for women is an extraordinary opportunity. It's an extraordinary thing. And for the husbands, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. So what he's saying here is, if you're frustrated that the words you're using are bouncing off of him like he's covered with Teflon, then what you need to do is work on your beauty, because that attracted him to start, right? Right. But not the kind of beauty you might think. Not the beauty of, I'm going to change my clothes this week and now he'll agree we're going to go to Disneyland. No, not that kind of, no, it's not like that. It's a different kind of beauty. And what he's making his case for is being subject to your husband, showing respect for your husband, actually is something that will equate in his mind to something beautiful about you. And most women have no clue that this happens, but this is really true. This is a real dynamic. It's you could go to someone late in life, to an older couple, and he could relate how he made the stupidest decision in his entire life, but his wife said, well, okay, honey. And it turned out horrible. You're going to go through all those kinds of stories. But then the man will segue and say, but you know what? That was one of the most beautiful things she ever did, was to show me that kind of respect when I was that wrong. And he sees it as an aspect of beauty. I'm not kidding. And this is what Peter's saying. This is an attractiveness to men. So let me just read it again. There is one kind of external beauty, and there's nothing wrong. He's not saying this stuff is wrong. This is like part and parcel. Braiding the hair, putting on gold jewelry, clothing wear. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that kind of stuff. But have you considered adorning yourself with the hidden person of the heart? the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. It's beautiful to your husband, maybe not immediately, but it eventually will become that, and it's really beautiful to God. Okay, now wait a second. You're trying to put all this together. You're telling me that if I'm in a relationship with a guy who's a jerk and he's constantly making substandard decisions, that I have to submit to his substandard decisions and not use any words in protest, and that in my quietness and my gentleness, it'll be as beautiful as me like wearing a string of pearls to him? Not now, but it will be. But to God, it's extraordinarily precious. Extraordinarily precious. Now, we'll get there if you're saying, I'm still not persuaded. Okay, I get there. But you got to understand that God's the one that made us differently. He made two sexes, two sexes. He made two sexes. And you can tell by how many X and Y chromosomes you have. There's just two. But in the making of men and women, he did deliberately make them differently. Not all carbon copies. Some with more masculine tendencies, some with more feminine, some with a little of feminine, some masculine. I mean, there's going to be a mix of those kind of qualities, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's still only two. But he said, but men and women are, in many respects, very different. And that's by God's design. He's the creator. He understands that. By the way, in Genesis 2, when he made men and women, and he saw before Eve came along that Adam was lonely, he says, we got to fix this. First, he trotted out every animal that he ever made and says, Adam, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Name them, name them, name them. And at the end, Adam says, well, there's none of these that are suitable. And then all of a sudden, he goes to sleep, and then wakes up, and there's Eve. Read Genesis 2. I do a bad summary. Read Genesis. And then there she is, and he goes, aha! Bone of my bones, flesh like. And she is like me, but she's not a clone of him, but she's relatable to him. So what makes relationships between men and women so fulfilling is the fact that you're different. And the fact that you are enough alike that you can relate to one another. Because, for instance, Adam looked at the animals. The example I use all the time is like, say a nice dog or something like that. I mean, a wonderful dog. And Adam could have seen this dog and said, this is man's best friend, man. But there's still something that's coming up short. You see that? And the reason isn't because it's different, but because it's not enough the same. You can't sit down with your retriever at night and have a deep conversation about work. It just doesn't work. So there's too much difference. So God said, got it. The solution to your loneliness is relationship, and relationships sizzle when you are enough alike that you can relate to one another, but you're enough different that they're not like you. That's the way it works. The worst thing you could ever do to solve your loneliness if you go into a science fiction world is to clone yourself and try and have a conversation with yourself. You would be frustrated in minutes. I mean, you can relate really well and you know what the other person is thinking, but that's just no solution to anything. That's worse than being alone, is to have me in the same room with me. Don't believe it? I can reference some science fiction novels for you because they point this out. So you need someone who's significantly different. So this is what he's saying right here, is this difference is a wonderful thing. Well, the difference here is if you want to be beautiful, that is attractive because of your differences to him, think about adding to your jewelry case respect. This works. Watch. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves. This was their active way of beautifying themselves. This is how they adorn themselves, by submitting to their husbands. There it is again. Yeah. Okay. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. How about that? Which is why we read the stories, or told you the stories about Abraham. It's quite instructive right here. And we'll take that apart in just a second. But I want you to look at this. They do not fear anything that is frightening. Now, what in the world would be frightening about submitting yourself to your husband? Well, I can come up with a lot of things. But let's say a lot of things, in fact. So we won't answer that question. Any suggestions? No, we're not going to do that. But what would cause you to be frightened? What makes you frightened is the fact that, well, this guy right here is determining the next steps in your life. And if the guy is kind of a zero up here and wants to do just the stuff that's going to please him, who knows what kind of ride you're going to be on for the next couple of years. And that actually isn't just inconvenient. That can be frightening. And that's frightening to a lot of women I've talked to. You want me to submit to a guy who's making decisions that is actually dangerous for our family, that's short-sighted? I mean, in every single way, I can tell you why this decision he made is wrong. And you want me to submit to him? As long as it doesn't cause you danger and harm, okay, in terms of a physical sense, I mean a deep way, yeah, I mean, because those are things that God does not endorse. But when we get out of that category of immediate danger, immediate harm, you know, you got to consider this. This is a beautiful thing to submit, and it probably will lead you to fright, as well as a whole other host of different emotions, resentment. I mean, you can go down the list. But interestingly enough, there's a great productive dynamic that's in play here that benefits the man and not you. So this is a sacrificial thing in part of your will that will actually benefit him. You mean it'll benefit him for me to reinforce his bad decisions? Yes. No. Yes. I am unpersuadable. Okay, never mind. I'll listen. Okay? We'll see where this goes. That's it, ladies. You can relax for a while. It's the guy's turn. We will come back and wrap this up. Don't worry about that. So remember, he says, be subject to the Lord's sake to every human institution. So guys, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. And at this point, most wives go, this seems unbalanced. That's not fair. You asked a lot of us. You're not asking a lot of him when you do this. So this is rigged for the guys. Well, no, not actually. So let's consider this just for a second. Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Again, it's an issue of the will. Many guys go into marriages, and again, I just hit this up all the time in premarital counseling. Guys go into marriages, think that they can live their lives like they were as adolescents, which is you live your life to do whatever pleases you, and I add her to my list of things that please me, so what's the big deal? And you have to tell them, well, no, actually, now that you're married, you have to start thinking about her more than you think about yourself. Who says? And guys that don't get over that, what I call the adolescent hump, this adolescent hump of maturing, if they don't get past that, they will immediately torpedo to their marriages because they're still stuck on themselves. And they see a wife as just an addition to the many things that please them. And so there you go. And any wife can tell you that's totally wrong. But unbelievably, young men don't know this. No young man knows this. They have to be civilized to know this. Now, fortunately, in some households, if you raise kids, and you raise them in a sense of respecting other people so that you constantly drill into them, you can't live your entire moment day by day by pleasing yourself. You actually have to think about the people around you. Have you had these discussions with your kids? Have you thought about what this would do to them? No. I know. So come on. Think before you act. Well, you drill this into them. The guys that come out of houses like that where the parents constantly drill them on, look, it's not about you. You got to consider other people. They do better when they transition into marriage. But the ones where they're left completely open and say, just do what pleases you, honey, and they get into a marriage, it's very, very hard. It's very hard. They have to have on-the-job learning about suddenly changing their lives from being so self-centric to being considerate about someone else, and not just being nice to someone else who's around, but actually considering them all the time. It's a gigantic hurdle. And that's why I'll always say marriage is probably the most civilizing dynamic in human experience. It turns self-centered jerks into people who actually think about other people's outcomes. And if they don't, the relationship stops. So it's an issue of the will. Will a guy submit his best idea about what's going to please him today to what's going to please her today? Am I willing to take my will, which I've been so addicted to as I've grown up in life, taking my will and saying, I think I'm going to stop for a second and say, Jim, it's not important what's going to please you now. I think I need to consider her. You willing to do that? So it's an issue of the will, just like for the wife, submitting was an issue of the will. Again, we have two wills that need to do one thing, and what Peter's making the appeal to with the husbands now is that, look, what you need to do is live with her in an understanding way, which means when you're coming up with the tiebreaker vote about what you're going to do for summer vacation, you need to understand her reaction to this final decision that you are going to make. Have you thought about that? You need to live with her and understand. You need to understand. So husbands, if you're not constantly in this effort in your clumsy communication style, honey, well, gee, okay, you can push past that. But if you're not constantly saying, I don't understand how you will or are reacting. Can you tell me more about what's going on in your head? Because you know what? I'm a guy. I'm clueless. Especially when it comes to women. So if women could be more like men, I could understand what you're dealing with. That was part of My Fair Lady. Why can't women be more like men? Yeah, okay. No, that's stupid. It's the difference that brings life to you. So kind of, work with it. Let's go with this. So live in an understanding way. So husbands, are you willing to take your will and have it be subjected in the end to an understanding of what effect it'll have on her? Are you willing to do that? No, I've never had to do that before. Well, you better start. Okay? He's going to explain a little bit more. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. Now, this is also where women in my office start to shift the other way when they read this. Let's look at this more carefully. An understanding way. And showing honor. What is the showing honor? The showing honor is, it actually comes from a mercantile word, and it means to weigh the value of something on a scale to find out coins. How many coins, how much gold is it going to take to do this? So in a scale, in their idea, a scale shows you relative value between two things. It's so really this showing honor is bringing to mind her value. Does she have a value? Now, I'm not talking about monetary value, but it's the same idea. So showing honor just isn't telling people, she's my wife and I love her. That's not it. It's actually giving her, now here we go, great weight in a good way. People that you discount and disregard, they don't have any weight compared to you. You put you and them on the scale and yeah, you got the stuff and they don't. In the Old Testament, it says that the evil people, the wicked around you, are so without weight that they go up in the scales. They got nothing to them. So what he's saying is that, guys, you need to consider her, and you need to understand her extraordinary value. You need to put her on the scales and recognize that you are living with someone of extraordinary value, as opposed to just someone who happens to live in the house and does housework for me. And you don't value her based on that. You value her because of who she is by God's creation. Someone of extraordinary value. And again, when you go back to Genesis 2 and you see Adam's reaction when Eve shows up on the scene, his reaction is exuberant. He goes, ah! He saw her value instantly. And largely because he had been trying to find that same value in the animal parade that he'd been naming for so long. And then when he sees her, he goes, bingo, bingo, I value this woman that God has made for me. This is an extraordinary gift from God. Now, most guys don't walk around looking at their wives saying, this is an extraordinary gift from God. But when it comes to honoring and giving weight and showing value, you better be, because that's exactly the situation you're in. I saw a list this week of different factors in your life that can decrease the number of days and years in your life. On a relative scale of different things you do. You like smoking. I can't remember the numbers now, but there was this bar chart. Smoking takes off this many years off your life. This thing takes off this many years. It was a graded list of things. You know what the number one thing for men that took down years of their lifespan? Staying single. That was number one. Are you kidding me? Yeah, staying single. And then the list down after that, you could probably predict everything on the list. But that one, and it was like twice the size of years lost based on the next one down the list, which I can't remember what it was, but it was extraordinary. Yeah, that's a big deal. This is why God fashioned women for men, because they're coming up short by the way God's designed them, and they're fulfilled in that marriage sense there. So just saying, it's interesting. So show honor because she's extraordinarily valuable. And then he's got this thing about this weaker vessel. This always makes the women in my office a little, what do you mean weaker? Well, okay, chill. You probably know what weaker means when we talk about it. When you know the difference between men and women. I mean, there is just the physical aspect. That's very obvious, except for most of the people in our country right now, that men are physically stronger than women. There's just a change in development when you're growing in terms of how your muscle and bone structures happen when you have that much testosterone. I mean, it just happens. It happens. Which is why men in older cultures, agrarian cultures, were the ones that got behind the oxes tied to the plows that plowed the fields, because it takes some real heft to keep that plow in the dirt in hard clay when an ox is plowing. I mean, you gotta be somebody. Now, women can do this too, but I'm just telling you that it's a little easier task for the men, just because of this advantage that they have. When it comes down to law enforcement, okay, there's women law enforcement. Hi, Sheila. She's online right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you get down to actually apprehending a suspect who's violent, it's a great advantage to be 6'2" and weighing 250 pounds and working out every day. And, it makes, and that actually comes more often to men than does to women. So we know all this kind of stuff. So let's not disregard it. Again, like most of our culture seems to be deluded about, let's not disregard that. But there's other factors of weakness with women that men need to be understanding about. And the image that I always use to kind of illustrate that is this image right here. Here's a robotic hand holding an egg. And a gold egg. I like that. Okay? And here's the deal. Since I come out of technology, for years robotics has had difficulty trying to figure out, especially with hand manipulation and robotics, how not to destroy the things it's trying to grab. I mean, really, because you can have a robot that grabs like a softball, and you can, it doesn't matter how hard I've got it, drop it, right? But you can't do that with an egg. So it took years for scientists to figure out how to put sensors in the fingertips of these robotic hands so that they could sense presence and then sense force being applied, and only applying this much force and not anymore, so you don't grab it like you did a softball. Oh, that was bad, right? So there's this thoughtfulness about how to handle the egg, and it's exactly what Peter is saying to husbands. You be careful, because you can crush her. Not physically, but emotionally and soulfully. You can. You really can. You really can. And you just have to be knowledgeable. You got to be better than that robotic hand that senses when the touch happens and how much force. You got to be very careful about that. And I've seen this in counseling situations as well, where men are extraordinarily abusive and partially physical, but much more emotional. I mean, when you look at many novels that talk about women in fearful situations, like they're in a dark house and there's a man that's pursuing them in the house, and the terror and the fear. Well, there are some men who are very skilled at creating that atmosphere with their wives 24/7 and keeping them in fear and in terror. I mean, they easily. So men, you can break the egg that your wife is if you don't live with her in an understanding way. Now, there's one option, which is, well, just don't grab the egg at all. Let's just completely distance ourselves from actually dealing with the women in the household, because, well, us guys, we're just lunkheads, so I'll just, never relate to her, and that way I'll never accidentally crush her. There we go. No. Relationship is meant to be connected, touching. Peter's just saying it's a good deal for you because of that. Your lifespan will be lengthened because of that, say the scientists today. God says it'll be the solution to your loneliness. But, man, you got to be careful how you do it, because she can easily be crushed. Live with her in an understanding way. Okay, I've harped on this too long. Maybe not for some of you women, I don't know. So he emphasizes, why should I? Well, since they're heirs with you of the grace of life. Now, this is an extraordinary statement in the first century. It is an extraordinary statement. They are heirs with you in the grace of life. That is, the Creator, Savior, King made you as equals. Now, in the first century and all the centuries before that, in most ancient cultures, women did not have the same status as men. In fact, in most cultures, women had the same status as the cattle that the family owned. They were a possession for the men. But to have them be of equal status? Do you know how long it took in our country for women to have the vote? 1920. Can you believe that? I think. Check me on that. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And why? Well, the rationale was, well, you know, women don't have as much going on upstairs to make them informed voters. And so they're just going to be susceptible to what their husbands tell them to vote for. So instead of doubling the votes because men who are married actually get 2 votes through their wives, let's just not have the wives vote. So let's not have women vote at all, married or unmarried. I mean, it was a crazy idea. You go back as well when you talk about slavery worldwide, and even through our country in the 19th century, talk about slavery. What was the rationale for keeping people enslaved? Well, they're actually slightly subhuman. I mean, they're not really fully human. I mean, they got 2 eyes and hands and legs and stuff like that. But come on, they're not really totally human, so enslaving them is not a big deal. So it's this way of demeaning and putting down people that are not like you, and that largely came from the male community. There you go, as is. And it was replicated into husbands and wives. And Peter's saying, you just stop that right now. Stop that right now, because she is as much an heir of the grace of God as you are. Wow. And I think we've always known that. We've always known that. And we understand that when you look at it biblically. But biblically, God and Jesus, and you look at the entire narrative of the Old and New Testament, women were afforded great honor that is really quite extraordinary compared to documents of the same periods. I mean, it's really extraordinary. When did you do that study on the women's voices? About 4 years. Great study. She's really good at this. So I just did an honor thing right there, by the way. But when you look at the women, and and it's not until you go back and you actually survey women that pop up through the narratives, you go, man, you're right. This was very unusual for the culture, the worldwide culture. And even still today, the worldwide culture is still kind of coming up to speed on the fact that both men and women are both equal heirs in the grace of God and what he has planned for us. So Peter's saying, look, if you want a good reason for why you need to treat her well, you need to understand that she is made by God for you, and she is also an heir of what he has planned for all humanity. So just get with the program, buddy. That's my words. And isn't this interesting? So that your prayers may not be hindered. So look at that, guys. The degree to which you overlook the fact that she is made by God and a joint heir in what God has planned for the blessings of mankind. The degree in which you overlooked that, you're praying bad. You're praying wrong. You don't understand. If you're that disrespectful of a creature of God, then God's not going to listen to your prayers. He's not. So I think that's a fascinating thing. If your perspective is warped and twisted about the value of the creatures that God has made, then your heart's intent when you pray may be just as warped. Yeah. For instance, guys, what if you just came off of a long, hard argument with your wife? And you say to her, honey, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to pray for a while. And you go outside and you wander around the backyard and you say, well, I got to do something. So you start mowing the lawn, and while you're mowing the lawn, you're praying, God, you need to force her to agree with me on this because I'm right. And you know I'm right, God. And she's just not on top of things, and she's confused, and she's so emotional, she's not thinking clearly. And and you need to twist her arm to make her understand that I'm right and this is the right thing to do. Now, will God honor that prayer? No. Oh, well, it won't honor that prayer.
You ever do that?
Did I ever do that? Not saying.
Please sit.
But guys do have a tendency to do that. They do. I can't remember if I ever have. If I have, God has forcefully removed it from my memory as a benefit to me. That wouldn't be funny if it wasn't true, would it? So, yeah. So this is what we do. God actually will not honor your prayers if you don't value the people He's made. Because when you pray, we often think about praying for our needs, but your prayer should be more consumed with other people's needs. And if you don't really understand other people, then you don't understand their needs. And so your prayers for them are just probably wacko. They're just wacky. They're just, yeah. So I think that's an interesting connection Peter makes. It's very convicting for me in these last two sentences. You know, you need to honor her. She's a joint heir. You know, look, you need to understand who she is. You need to deal with her in an understanding way. So your prayers aren't all messed up. Wow. So let's do some application. That's the end of it. Guys, you're off hook now. Ladies, you're off hook now. Let's go back to Abraham and Sarah. And let's focus on what Sarah did, since the women's context here is more than both. But we'll look at both of them. What does Sarah do in the first and second episode when her husband let her be taken? What did she do? What did she say? Well, what she did was she submitted. And she submitted to what? She submitted to being given away to a foreign king. Isn't that wrong? Oh, yeah, that's like way wrong. That's like way wrong. Are you kidding me? But she submitted. Now, she could have blown the whole deal. You know how she could have blown the whole deal? She could have said, when Pharaoh or Ahimelech came up with their men to take her, she could have said, whoa, guys, we're married. That's all she had to do. We're married, okay? And probably at that point, Abraham wouldn't, go against her. So he wouldn't say, oh, no, shh, we're siblings. He probably wouldn't do that. Yeah, we are. She could have blown the cover on that spot by just blurting that out. She didn't do it the first time in Genesis 12, and she didn't do it 25 years later when the idiot Abraham did it again. And you would think the second time what you would say, if I was writing the Bible, this is what would have happened. Ahimelech's people would have come out there. This whole thing would be going down. And she would look to Abraham and say, what are you doing? Didn't you learn anything from 25 years ago? Didn't God bring any understanding to you what a stupid idea this is? She would have berated him right on the spot. And at that point, that interaction, the guys who'd come out from Ahimelech would have looked at that and said, yeah, she sure is married to that guy. just based on that interaction. I don't know, they would know it. They would know it. And then she could have squashed the entire deal completely. However, it may not have been to Abraham's benefit because it could have gotten him killed, right? So in one sense, she's protecting him because she doesn't want him to be killed. But in another sense, she is adorning herself with the beautiful jewelry of submission, and she just goes with the program. She goes with the program, which is going to bring an end to her marriage, and it's going to have her placed into some harem of some popular, important guy with lots of riches in a foreign country, and life will be totally different, but she submits herself to Abraham's plan. Now, was she fearful when she did that? It would be natural. It would be natural. So why would she submit to what is so clearly wrong and being so fearful in the process? What is her ace in the hole to protect her heart through this entire process? Well, if you go back to that verse you just talked about, she trusted in God. She trusted in God. So, when the inevitable fear and fright comes from submitting yourself to a husband who's not acting in an understanding way for you, and you suddenly can crystal clear see the outcome of this, which is going to be death and destruction for me and the kids and everything, She goes to God. She says, God, preserve me through this, but I'm going to submit. What? And that's what she did. And Peter actually calls her out right here, and says, here's your ideal. And ladies, you are an ideological daughter, because you act like you're an ideological daughter of Sarah if you do exactly the same thing. Now, this brings up a whole myriad of questions, like, well, so how bad can he be before I say, no, I'm not going to do that? Well, when it comes down to him demanding sin from you, that's one way to do it. I mean, you can draw the line right there. The line is actually different based on kind of a range of issues. So I'm not saying you need to actually incur that kind of problem with yourself if you do that, the danger to yourself. But clearly Sarah did actually go into the land of self-harm, perhaps, in doing this. I mean, this is why it's an extraordinarily beautiful jewel. She did something that none of us would ever predict that she would do. I mean, ever. But she submitted. And I have to believe, although we have just a little evidence, that this eventually changed Abraham. It took 2 stupid episodes, 25 years apart, 2 stupid episodes, but I think at the end of that, Abraham said to himself, yeah, what am I doing? What am I doing? I did this twice, and it came out wrong both times. You have to believe he came out changed after that. And I can show you some evidences of it. We're not going to look at that. Of where finally he kind of switched and went away from his adolescent. It's always about me. Save my skin, honey. Tell them you're my sister. That way they won't kill me because it's all about them not killing me. So I don't care if it dissolves our marriage. I don't care if it actually does anything else. But, it's all about me staying alive. So you need to do what it takes to stay alive. So just go with the flow. Husbands who are that self-centered are never going to have their relationships continue. But their relationship did continue. Isaac was born the next chapter when you take a look in this. I mean, good things start to happen. Now look, when I apply this into the modern age, I ask myself, were there times when I made poor choices and Dorothy went along with it, fully knowing a better choice? She's not making eye contact.
Yes, I am.
Yes, she is. Fully knowing a better choice, and yet she said, okay, let's do that. And here's how the scenario works out. You go into this thing, the guys go into it thinking, yeah, this is the right thing to do. Okay, and then 99 out of 100 times it comes to kind of an unexpected end from the guy's perspective. However, from the women's perspective, it's not an unexpected end. It was inevitable, right? Sorry, I spit on you again. And so when you get to this point where it just kind of collapses in the end, and reality is your worst taskmaster, reality comes in and says, no, that was a bad idea. And for guys, that usually is their clue to say, that was a bad idea. Is you got to crash against the wall somehow. Now at that point, ladies, you can do the supreme evil of saying, I told you so. That is a supreme evil. But you can change your husband. You can change your husband by saying, yeah, honey, but, I trusted you all along. It worked out okay. And you say to him, I respect your decision, and we're here, and God can recover us, and everything will be okay. Now, what this does to the man is he hears respect when he hears that, but also a magical thing happens inside of him because he loves his wife, he loves his children, and the last thing he wants to do is to make a thoughtless choice that brings harm to them. And when you do get to the precipice of this harm coming to him, he is wrecked inside. And most women don't really understand this, but a man again, by God's design, is so much more wired to be the protector and the provider and all that kind of stuff. And when his best plans end up hitting the rocks and things don't work the way they are, if a man is doing this not to save his skin, but actually to protect his wife and his children whom he loves, it's just like a knife twisting inside him. He goes, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? I will never do that ever again. This is a real thing that happens in men. And this is the beginning of a profound change process in the man. That if she had instead instead of submitting, decided she was going to try and talk him out of it at the beginning, he wouldn't be at this wonderful benefit moment of this knife twisting in his gut, because suddenly he realizes that the lives of the people that are put in his charge can be completely screwed up by his choices. And unless you let him make those choices, he'll never change. So ladies, here's the challenge. Are you willing, for the benefit of the change of your husband into the man you want him to be eventually, are you willing to let him make decisions that could completely shipwreck your family and your life? Are you willing to let him do that? And again, there's some limits to this, but I'm just saying, how far are you willing to go to let him make bad decisions? For the purposes of when you hit the rocks, God uses that to change him inside, because he's designed to change from that and not from your words. And I've seen change. And interestingly enough, by you submitting to a bad leader, you actually have a hand in creating the leader you always wanted. Did you hear that? It's a fascinating thing. The degree to which you submit to a bad leader, because of the hands of God in his life, you actually gain the leader you've always wanted. I think that's fascinating. That's just absolutely fascinating. And what does it take? RESPECT. Respect, submit, dialogue on what to do, but in the end say, honey, it's your choice. Which says, where we end up after your choice is going to fall on your shoulders, and you're going to have to deal with that. I've told you everything I can tell you. Make your decision, and I'll go with whatever you decide. Here we go, because I'm going with you wherever you go. Here we go. Sometimes it ends in good. He's reinforced. Sometimes it ends in bad. For younger guys, a lot. But God changes him, twists the knife inside. How can you possibly think of endangering the lives of the people you love? What are you, an idiot? I mean, guys, you feel that in a deep place. It's just hard to describe. I mean, it happened to me on a number of occasions. And today when I go back and think of them, I start to cry. I think, how could I ever, what was I thinking? It wasn't a bad decision. It was just a thoughtless decision 9 times out of 10. Oh. And those things today resonate inside of me in such strong ways that if Dorothy hadn't let me go there, I wouldn't be the guy I am today. So, do you want him to be the guy that you always wanted him to be? Well, let him lead. Trust God so you don't fear the outcome of the bad leadership, but let him lead, and in the end, God will transform him into the man you've always wanted. Now, guys, let's go back to Abraham for a second. Did he try and deal in that situation in an understanding way with Sarah when he let her be taken by Pharaoh and Ahimelech? I mean, really? Was he understanding what she was going through? Honey, I want you to walk away from our marriage. I want you to be taken by a foreign, prince. I want you to be part of the many women that's part of his harem. I think you'll have a happy life there. And I'll still be alive. Who's he thinking about? Me. He's thinking about me. He never considered her. Living with her in an understanding way. Did he even try and understand what her reaction was going to be when he did such a stupid thing twice? No. He didn't live with her in an understanding way. He didn't even want to think about that. Forget it. Also, remember I said that honoring her is a matter of like the scales of valuing someone, what their weight is. Well, it turns out that when he was letting her go, she was saying to herself, he doesn't value me at all. At all. I mean, she feels like this big. Because in order to save him, he's willing to just let her be taken off to someone's harem. He doesn't think I have any value at all. Man, Abraham really screwed up. That's what I like about the Old Testament. It's full of screw-ups. It's full of people doing selfish, egotistical, stupid things like over and over and over, and yet through the whole stream of that narrative, you have a tolerant and patient God who's rolling his eyes all the time at the idiots these creatures are. He comes this close to blowing them away a couple of times, but God in his patience hangs there because God so loved the world that he gave his son. He loved these people. And so in the midst of that contrast of the bad and the good and people doing dumb things and sinning, God's still there saying, well, here we go. I love them, but man, they can be a handle sometimes. So God, in his infinite wisdom, looks at men and says, guys, I want you to lead. I want you to bear the brunt of the hardest decisions in your relationships. And the consequences. I want you to stay up at night wrestling over the possibilities of an extraordinarily hard family decision that you need to make. You need to make, because I made you to be able to deal with this, and she needs to be sheltered from the power and the weight of that decision. You need to do this as a service to her. But buddy, I'm holding you accountable. This is the way God made us. It's the way he made us. And so the degree to which women submit to that difference in plan, and the degree to which men submit to that plan, and men do it with understanding and with love, you get someplace based on the way God designed marriage and God designed the difference between men and women. That's all we're saying. So biblical counseling in terms of marriage comes down to a couple very simple things. And simple things that in the Abraham and Sarah stories, Abraham violated big time, but Sarah did in a wonderful way. And Sarah, even to this day, I look back at those stories, and I read them again, I don't know how many times this week, and I look at Sarah and go, man, she is extraordinarily attractive to me. And she is. I look at them and go, oh, I got to tell you, there's very few women I've known like this. This woman's a gem. And when you look at women in the Old Testament who are under a pretty unfair kind of patriarchal system in many respects, some of them, they show up on the scene, you go, man, this woman, she's something. And she's very attractive to me. And I can make a list. It was most ladies on the list that you made. And I read them and go, oh, yeah, beautiful. I have no clue what they look like. I don't know if they braided their hair or wore gold or had great clothing, but I got to tell you, this woman's beautiful to me. Why? Because she let you walk all over her? No, because she trusted God in the face of a husband who's stupid. There's some great ladies. Great ladies. So, do you want to end up like this? Because let me tell you what happens. Just play the scenario with me just for a couple of seconds. I'll tell you what happens when you don't do what I just said. What you end up with is a relationship where you have a nag and a couch potato. Why? Well, because the wife decided that the best way to influence her husband was with words. I already know that that's really a non-productive route to take with someone who is unpersuadable with words. And so what happens? He starts building this irritation with her that she never stops nagging him about this thing to do. And I'm never going to do that. So when is she going to stop nagging me? So what does he end up doing? He starts to completely disregard anything she ever says ever again. Because he needs to get that noise out of his head. This is what an unpersuadable mind does. She does that. And yet, she seems to think that if she does it more and more loudly, it'll be more effective until it gets through his thick skull. So instead of backing off, you just ramp it up. And this is what happens. You wake up the next day, well, he clearly didn't hear me yesterday. I'll say it differently and louder today. And he's going, nah, talk to the hand, And so this division starts to happen. Her influence in his life verbally goes to zero. Even if it was something, it was at zero at this point. Now he considers everything she says to be an attack and to be manipulative, which exactly is what it is. They're both attacking and manipulative. And so he completely shuns her, and she starts turning into what she thinks is the leader of the household. If he won't lead here, I will. And so he ends up abdicating his role as a leader in the household, and she ends up taking over the household, and she decides, well, if he's not, because what he does is he retreats from even doing any actions that she wants. So she just takes over the whole ball. She actually takes over what God designed as the male's role in the household. But because she's not made that way, she comes up with a kind of a nasty caricature of what leadership's supposed to be like. She's demanding. She shouts a lot. She's a nag. I mean, it's a horrible thing. She's not in the position she needs to be. Now, on the other side, what happens to the man? Is this interchange something that draws him into more godly leadership in the household? No. He divides from her. He starts to completely disregard everything she says, distances himself from her. And on top of that, he figures, since he can't get any response from her because she's just acting kind of crazy, I'm just not going to do anything. Because after all, she's taken over the reins of the family. She's the one that's making the decisions. I'm good with that. Just give me my beer and my couch and my television. And I'll just do what pleases me. And I'll let her run the household. And he becomes a couch potato. Because his role in the household has been usurped by the woman. Now, that's partially because not partially, I think largely because he never really gave her weight in the household. I mean, when they were coming up with the one decision from the two wills, he never really gave her the weight of being an equal in the relationship. He never really laid the groundwork for loving her. She never got a sense in which she was appreciated and loved. And so he had a huge hand in creating the woman who's now nagging him 24 hours a day because he never loved her, because he never valued her, because he never gave weight to her. You end up with a nag. Well, actually, I don't use the word nag. I usually say battle axe. You end up with a battle axe and a couch potato. And this is not a caricature. This is reality for so many people. And I think largely because of a failure with the men. They started it. They didn't value her. They didn't live with her in an understanding way when they made their decisions. They didn't understand that leading is all about considering the other person and not yourself. They didn't do all that kind of stuff. And so the wife responded sinfully as well, but she responded that bad action by trying to take over the situation, trying to force him verbally to change, making the decisions when he won't make the decision. And I mean, the role swap and all that kind of stuff. They're both acting very badly. And they're both, now listen, this is really important. They're both getting the spouse they never wanted to have. They're both getting the spouse they never wanted to have. That wife didn't want to have a guy who's a couch potato. And he never wanted a wife who was going to be a battle axe nag 24/7. And that was, neither of them foresaw this when they got into marriage. But when you get in line with the way God has designed men and women and with relationships, by doing some simple things. And ladies, I'll just put it at the top of the list. RESPECT is a gigantic way to have your husband build in positive directions under the hand of God. It's enormous. It's enormous. Respect him and submit to the choices he makes. Let him make mistakes. God will fashion for you the man you've always wanted. I guarantee it. And guys, come on now. If you value her and you live with her in an understanding way, she will actually feel more beautiful as every day goes on. She'll feel more treasured, and rightly so, because she is. And she will, in a real sense, blossom into the most beautiful person than you could ever have imagined when you first married her, because you valued her and treasured her, took care of her, considered her, understood her. You will get exactly the wife that you've dreamed of. But it's going to take you investing in taking your will, making it second, and understanding her in all the choices you make. So the fascinating thing about all this is that when we first get married, although it's a wonderfully bubbly time of life, the spouse that you have at that point isn't the spouse that you're going to get. But in the end, depending on how you react in the relationship in these very simple things, you will get the spouse that you deserve based on your actions. We were just trying to figure out, I think it was Howard Hendricks once said, husbands, look at your wives. He says, I'll see if I can say this way. Husbands, look at your wives. If you don't like what you see, you made her this way. The reverse is also true. The reverse is also true. The ladies, to the degree to which you take the reins, become the leaders in the household, nag him, trying to get him to do something, get frustrated and do it yourself, you lose the leader that you always wanted, and you have to be the leader, and you will resent having to make all the decisions in the house from that point forward. You'll resent it. Why won't he get up off that couch and make them some decisions and take us somewhere and do something? Why won't he do that? Well, honey, it's because you pushed him out of the way. Yeah. So we know this dynamic, and Peter's just cluing us into what we've always known. So don't be like that. But, like this, I always look at this contrast between younger couples and older couples. And when you look at older couples and you see ones where their relationships has really turned into a marvelous thing, what you understand is that the people on the left, when they got married, were different people than the people on the right when you give them 20, 40, 50 years together. They're different people. And they have had a gigantic hand in shaping each other. So in the end, the person that you got is not the person that you married. And it's largely because of what you did in the relationship. So when you get there and say, gosh, how can I have a successful marriage like yours? She would probably think to herself, well, just two things. I respect him and I don't fear. That's what Peter's saying. Don't fear the consequences of a poor leader. God will still take care of you. I respect him. I don't fear. And for the guys, I love her and I understand her, which are not emotion words, they're action words. I love her and I understand her. So if you put those two simple things, in fact, in other passages on marriage in the New Testament, they really highlight just one aspect for each side. Husbands, love your wives. That's an action term. And then wives, respect your husbands. Really? Is it that simple? Well, it's simple to say, but in the conflicts, it's hard to do. And you may incur some risks by doing it, but the risks are outweighed by the fact that God will be in work in your spouse if you take these right steps. I mean, that's the way it works. So, yeah, if you survey older couples, you'll see a lot of this in their relationship. You'll see a ton of this. So you have a choice to be like them, or you can be like these two, where she chose words over her conduct. And he didn't bother to understand her. And you get battle axes and couch potatoes because they've completely turned on its head God's design for marriage. Because in the process of taking two wills and make it one, they've done it the wrong way. Done it the wrong way. And it's really that simple. It's really that simple. I could make a list for you for the ways in which Dorothy allowed me to make I'll say substandard choices. Yeah, substandard. That doesn't sound quite as guilty. But poorer choices than I think she could have made. And in the process, I got better and better making those choices. Right? Doesn't that make sense? But you got to let them do that. And it could be the actual life of her and the family and the kids. Not in a danger sense, but in terms of best versus okay. You got to let that go, even if you have better ideas. And by the way, I have found in my experience that men don't have better ideas than women. And women don't have better ideas than men. They both have kind of pretty good ideas. You need to get your heads together. So this is not by way of saying that you don't need to talk to each other and the guy can basically just do what he wants to do. The idea is to bring your two heads together, come up with your best ideas together, and work on things, coming up with the one decision. And guys, instead of making a big case about what you think is right and why, I mean, you can make your case, but you need to be actively listening and listening to what she's saying and why. And if it doesn't make sense to you, don't say, I wish women could be more like men. Say, honey, I don't understand what you're talking about because I'm clueless and I'm a man. So can you help me out here? Because I'm not getting it. And then keep doing that until you get it. And then after you've had this discussion and you sit in the two chairs in the living room, she says to him, I trust you to make that decision. I'm glad I don't have to. Go for it. You're my guy. Let's do it. I got to tell you, that just, something comes up in a man at that point where he goes, okay, let's do this. And he'll own it in the end if it's bad. So, I mean, it's just a wonderful process. And on the flip side, what if he understands you, ladies, so well that he makes a choice for you jointly that he would never pick in his entire life, but you know he's doing it for you. And then it works out well. You're rejoicing. He's rejoicing. It's a beautiful thing. So there's a gigantic upside to all of this because now you'll have a man who makes decisions understanding how you react in response to his decisions. He understands. So is it easier or harder, ladies, to submit yourselves to a husband who understands you or doesn't understand you? Well, if he understands you and he has a track record of making decisions as to your benefit, then the next time he makes a decision, you go, honey, in the recent past, you've been making great decisions. And I trust you. And I really have no fears about this, because your track record is telling me that you understand my needs and my desires and what fulfill me, and you're using that to incorporate in your decision right now. And it may be more about me than about you. Sure, I can rest in submitting to you because you've got my best needs at heart. That's easy. That's easy because I know you love me. That's easy. But if he's a couch potato and he's not expert in making decisions, it's going to be really hard to submit to those things. So this brings us back to the beginning of what Peter's talking about. I'm making recommendations to you, he says, for how to live in a relationship when the man is unpersuadable, when the man's not following the word. How do you bring about change in his life that's to his benefit? Believe it or not, submission. It works. Respect him and submit to decisions and let it go. Sarah did it, and we came out with an Abraham at the end of his life, who actually is quite a stellar human being, who made gigantically bad errors most of his life. But I have a big feeling that Sarah's actions in submitting to him under those circumstances was a tool in God's hands that changed Abraham. And this is what marriage is all about. Not only the solution to loneliness, but the solution to knocking the edges off of your character and making you the kind of people God wants you to be. Your primary, I won't say primary, one of the strongest avenues of sanctifying change in your life is your spouse. If your spouse will react in a biblical way. I'm just convinced of it. I'm convinced of it. So even with the shortened lifespan for guys, if you don't get married, most guys would say, look, has your marriage added or taken years off your lifespan? Most guys will say, oh man, it's taken years off my lifespan. I can't tell you the numbers of time we've argued. Oh my gosh, who needs that? She's just a 24/7 nudge. But that's just not true. Because a marriage, when done the way God wants it to be, it's extraordinarily life-giving and extraordinarily molding to you becoming like God in so many respects. It civilizes you into the kingdom of God. It makes men think about the needs of others. It makes men love in a natural way. And it brings women to a point of restful submission. I mean, both of those positions are something that are not natural to us. They're just not natural to us. It's a remarkable thing. So, in the end, I'll stop talking. I'm a great proponent of marriage. However, there's some tough things that go through it. And you may be called, ladies, to be a Sarah on a camel being hauled away to a Pharaoh. It may be as weird as that in your marriage for the benefit of making him into the person you want him to be. Doesn't make much sense on the front side, but on the flip side, God's got this. You don't need to fear. We don't need to see them anymore. I'll not be shaken when my husband makes bad decisions. Father in heaven, we thank you for this creation of marriage that you've brought to us. And we're honest. We see the frictions that are there. We see the difficulties. We see the misunderstandings. And there's a lot of that. But God, we also acknowledge and give you glory and honor for the fact that you've created marriage to bless us. And we are blessed. We are blessed by our spouses. It's an extraordinary thing. So we thank you for that. We thank you for the promise of marriage for those who are not married, or for those who are between marriages, a promise that can be there when we walk in godly ways with one another. And Father, we pray that we would be humble and submit our wills mutually to one another, that we wouldn't be self-centered in our relationships, not only in marriage, but in every other relationship, that everything is all about us and not about others. You are constantly crafting us into people with your own heart, and we understand that you love and you give and you sacrifice as an outgrowth of that love. And God, we want to be that way as well too. In marriage, in every relationship, we want to be that way. Not just because things work like that, but because you're glorified. And that's what we love so much about you, that even while we were yet sinning, Christ died for us. Even while we were separated ourselves through rebellion, you loved us. And so God, make us people like that, because we've fallen in love with that kind of love. So thanks for this very practical information now. In Jesus' name.